Hi, welcome to Trinity Place, Geneva, New York. My name's Cameron Miller. If you'd been here on a Sunday morning, I'd have greeted you at the door. Honestly, can I be honest? I'm going to be honest regardless. I'm going to start out with a very brief word about Trinity, the Trinity, since it is Trinity Sunday on the Episcopal Church calendar, and then somehow I'm going to relate that conversation about Trinity to what we have to lean on in this moment of crisis and the opportunities that crisis may offer. The notion of the Trinity makes me bristle. I know that may sound odd to many Christians. I have no problem whatsoever with people who embrace the idea of the Trinity as a metaphor for God or the experience of God's presence in our lives or among us within the creation. No problem with that at all. We are like that story of the blind men feeling different parts of the elephant and describing it. The one who has the trunk imagines an elephant is like a hose. The one who holds the tail imagines the elephant's like a rope. The one who has a hold of the leg imagines that the elephant is like a tree, and so on. The idea of the Trinity is a metaphor for a little piece of the whole that we think we have our arms around. But the idea of the Trinity is forever tarred with the ugliness of orthodoxy. That virus on Christianity that violently sought to make all Christians conform in unanimous support and praise of, quote, right belief delivered from on high by an empire, then by an imperial church, then by a Eurocentric colonialist churches, and now by a vast crowd of Christians around the world insisting that their part of the elephant is the real and whole thing. Look it. The Trinity is not a gospel-based idea. In fact, it violates the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. The Shema was something that Jesus and all the disciples would have held as a core principle of their faith. But in spite of that, the Trinity became the prime theological idea of Orthodox Christianity. But here's the thing. Christianity is not a religion. It's a lot of religions. And Christianity is not a single theology. It's a whole bouquet of theologies. And Christianity is not a single moral system. It is, in fact, a plethora of moral systems. It's better for us to be intellectually honest to describe Christianity in that way, which is in fact what it is better and more intellectually honest for us to describe Christianity as a way of life, not the way, as a way of life, which is in fact what the first generation of Jesus' followers called it, the way. If someone made me boss of the world, which is pretty unlikely, I would call it the Tao of Jesus, the way of Jesus, a spiritual practice that shapes how we live, which in turn then shapes who we are. Even the Episcopal Church, there are many different ways of practicing the Tao of Jesus. Some are quite formal and heavy on tradition, while others are more fluid and ride the waves of innovation. Then there is everything in between. Some folks insist that the Trinity, insist on the Trinity and love of the Nicene Creed as the only true statements of faith, while others find both of them stumbling blocks in the 21st century. So I would say, let's spread out, make some room. But none of that is really what I want to talk about today. I just felt I had to say something because we have this day every year we call Trinity Sunday, And the name of our congregation is Trinity, and there it all is, staring us right in the face. So I'll end this little riff about the Trinity by saying something you already know. You're free to describe God in your own terms, from your own experience, and with your own sense of mystery. If the idea of the Trinity helps you with that, then let's celebrate. If not, then let's keep working on it. We have lots of room. All right, enough about that. Let me turn away from ideas and controversies of the past we need not fight anymore and turn toward the very fierce present. We are seeing things we have never seen before. In the midst of pandemic, with a deadly virus that doesn't pick sides, crowds of all colors have taken to the streets to draw a line in the concrete on racial killings and injustice. We've seen police officers take a knee and walk with the protesters. Has that ever happened before? At a rally here in Geneva, I heard the chief of police condemn the 4 Minneapolis police officers. And then 4 Geneva police officers, including the chief, stood behind the speakers at the rally and they shouted out, "Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter," along with the crowd. I have never seen that before. We watched hundreds of doctors and nurses in New York City flock outside and stand in open windows, cheering the demonstrators, reversing the shower of appreciation they had received. Doctors and nurses cheering street demonstrations. We never saw that before. We heard the Speaker of the House talk about faith, hope, and charity, and where she finds hope in times like these. And it wasn't in an evangelical way, as if to say we should all believe as she does. It was a heartfelt, earnest response to a question that made room for people of no faith as well. I've never heard that before, spoken from the heart and with assurance from someone in her position. The other day I looked at the polls, and 55% of Americans disagreed with those protesting against the COVID restrictions. And even more dramatic was a poll that said 64% of Americans have expressed support for the current peaceful protesters. Those numbers could, of course, change overnight. But how long has it been, if ever, that there was such strong majorities covering 2 such onerous controversies? We haven't seen that before, or at least not for a very long time. And just to say the obvious that has been underemphasized by commentators, the streets are filled with people of all colors. We haven't seen that before. Go back to those films of the 1960s civil rights demonstrations, and sure, you'll see some white people in the crowd, but nowhere near the plurality that we're seeing now. We just haven't seen that before. Now, we have no idea how and where this ends. I have no business pretending to see beyond the shadow of the present moment, and anyone who does is full of hooey. But something is happening. We haven't seen a pandemic like this before, and we haven't been where we are now with public demonstrations before, and we have not seen such naked usurpation of power by a President of the United States while his party stood idly by before. Not in our lifetime. When things happen that haven't happened before, we know that something is changing. The avalanche of history has begun to rumble, and the escarpment is giving way. Whatever takes place now, we know it is changing the face of life as we have been living it. This we know, even though we do not know much else. Some fear it's Armageddon or the rapture. Some fear the forces of change, and others fear the forces against change. Some just fear because the boundaries on control and normalcy are now chipping and cracking and crumbling. So in the midst of what we cannot predict, when we cannot see beyond the smoke and the fires or the militarization of control, and we do not know yet what to hope for, we can lean on what we do know. I believe that the Tao of Jesus includes the affirmation we just heard from Julian of Norwich, where she wrote so many centuries ago, because of the great infinite love which God has for all humankind, God makes no distinction in love between the souls that follow Jesus and the souls that do not. That our souls are made to be God's dwelling place, and God dwells in our souls. The Tao of Jesus, as we have come to understand it, insists on our living lives and loving one another in exactly the same way that God dwells in our souls, with no distinctions. That's something firm we can lean on in a time when we cannot see ahead of us, and when we know that what is behind us is now behind us forever. And right there, of course, spells the situation that we are in. We cannot see ahead, and we know that what is behind us will never return. We do not know what or how or when the pandemic will end, nor how it will have changed life as we had come to understand it. But that's also true of the struggle in the streets, ignited by George Floyd's murder at the hands of state power. Is this the tipping point that changes everything, so that there is no going back to the days and the laws and the customs of white resistance, to no distinction about how God loves us and who we love and how we treat one another as a society? But those who want to go backwards and those who want to go forward are struggling for power in the present in order to control the future. In the midst of that struggle, we have the Tao of Jesus to lean on. No distinction to govern our love. No distinction to merit a hierarchy of justice, unless, of course, it is the one that places the last first. We do not know how this ends, but we do know the Tao of Jesus and what it tells us about how to act, about how to shape our lives, about how to reckon our choices, and about how to use our own power. We don't know squat about God. Let's just say that right now. God is too much for us. More than we can describe or reduce to any ridiculous human formula or idea summing up this thing that created the cosmos. We have inklings and moments, and we have visions and slight brushing up against the sacred. But more than those, we just do not know. Yet we do have the Tao of Jesus to hold on to. We have Jesus, who was very human, a very human agent of God, who showed us how to be human. who showed us the way to create God's kingdom on earth as we imagine it is in any place that we would call heaven. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Excuse me. This Tao of Jesus, my friends, does not point us toward violence or support repression, or in any way does it guide us to resist racial and economic justice for all. It does not prescribe an exact and precise way to create the kingdom on earth, but it sure offers guidance. That guidance has to do with love. It has to do with peacemaking. It has to do with equity and justice and inclusion. So that is a strong and steady platform to lean on right now until we know where we're going and how this crisis ends. The Tao of Jesus is the way we need to be following right now. At least that's what we have said as we have worshiped together up until this moment. The Tao of Jesus is our way in this moment and in the next. I commend it to you. Amen. And thank you.